The late-night delivery. John leaned back on his couch, staring at the dim light of his TV screen. It was past midnight, and he was hungry. He had ordered a pizza nearly 30 minutes ago, and now he was just waiting. Outside, the rain poured heavily. The wind howled, rattling the windows of his small apartment. It was the kind of night where no one wanted to be outside. John felt a little guilty for making some poor delivery person come out in this weather. But food was food. A sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Knock. Knock. John pushed himself off the couch and walked toward the door. He expected to see a tired, annoyed delivery driver, maybe some college kid trying to earn extra cash. But when he opened the door, he froze. The girl standing there didn't look normal. She wore a red and black pizza delivery uniform, soaked from the rain. Water dripped from her short, dark hair, clinging to her pale blue skin. Wait, blue skin? John blinked. No, he wasn't imagining it. Her skin really was light blue, like faded ink. Her large, dark eyes met his. She didn't speak. She just stood there, holding out the pizza box with both hands. For a second, John thought this was some kind of prank, maybe a weird Halloween costume. But it wasn't Halloween, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. This wasn't fake. Hey," John said, hesitantly taking the pizza box from her hands. He tried not to stare, but it was impossible. "Rough night, huh?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, blinking slowly. Rain dripped down her face. John shifted uncomfortably. Something about her wasn't right. She didn't shiver, even though she was drenched. Her breathing was too slow, too measured. "Hey, you okay?" he asked. Still, she didn't respond. But then, after a long pause, she said, "No home." John frowned. Her voice was soft, almost mechanical. The way she spoke was odd, like she was still learning how to form sentences. "What do you mean, no home?" She didn't answer. She just stared at him, unblinking. The wind picked up, sending cold air into the apartment. Rain splashed onto the doorstep. John hesitated. He wasn't sure what was happening here, but something inside him told him this girl, this thing, wasn't just a normal delivery driver. But she looked lost, helpless, alone. John sighed. "Do you want to step inside for a bit, just to dry off?" For the first time, the girl's expression changed. Her eyes widened slightly, like she didn't expect that offer. She hesitated, looking past John into the apartment. A flicker of something crossed her face. Fear, uncertainty. Then, slowly, she took a step forward. The moment she crossed the threshold, the apartment lights flickered. John's stomach tightened. What the hell was that? The girl stood still in the doorway, her wet clothes dripping onto the floor. She seemed different now. The air felt heavier, like something invisible had just entered along with her. John swallowed. Let me grab you a towel." She nodded slightly. He hurried to the bathroom, grabbed a clean towel, and returned, only to find her staring directly at the ceiling. John stopped in his tracks. Her head was tilted all the way back, her black eyes fixed on the ceiling lamp. The light flickered again. His pulse quickened. Something was seriously weird about her. "Hey," he said carefully, handing her the towel. "Here." She lowered her head, blinked at the towel like she didn't know what to do with it. Then, slowly, she took it. John cleared his throat, trying to act normal. "So, do you, work around here? I've never seen you before." She hesitated before answering. "Work, yes." That wasn't very convincing. John grabbed the pizza box, opened it, and took a slice. He needed something to focus on besides the strange girl dripping water in his living room. He took a bite, chewing slowly, watching her. She didn't move. She just stood there, clutching the towel in both hands, staring at the pizza like she'd never seen food before. "Hungry?" John asked. She hesitated. Then, very softly, she whispered, "Not allowed." John frowned. "What do you mean, not allowed?" Before she could answer, a strange sound came from outside. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't rain. It wasn't the wind. It was rhythmic, too deliberate. John's body stiffened. He turned toward the window. A shadow moved outside. Not a person. Not an animal. Something else. The girl's posture changed instantly. She clutched the towel tighter, took a step backward. Her breathing grew shallow. John noticed something for the first time. She wasn't just wet. She was bruised. Dark marks lined her arms, her neck, like she'd been grabbed, like someone had been chasing her. The realization hit him hard. He opened his mouth to speak, but she grabbed his wrist, her fingers ice cold. They found me. John's blood ran cold. Who? Then, the doorknob twisted. Someone was outside. Something isn't right. The doorknob twisted again. John's breath caught in his throat. His apartment wasn't the kind of place people just visited in the middle of the night, especially during a storm. He stared at the girl, her fingers still cold against his wrist, her dark eyes unblinking. "Who found you?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly turned her head toward the door, her movements eerily smooth, like she wasn't entirely used to moving in a human body. Another knock, harder this time. Thud, thud, thud. John took a step back, his mind racing. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. No one should be able to see inside unless they were standing on the fire escape. But the shadow outside the window just moments ago, it had moved too fast. His gut screamed at him, "This isn't normal." He glanced back at the girl. She was still staring at the door, her breathing unnaturally slow. She wasn't scared, at least, not in the way a normal person would be. Instead, she looked, calculating, like she was deciding whether to run or stay. John's throat felt dry. "Who's outside?" he asked again. This time, she answered, "Hunters." The way she said it, so calm, so matter-of-fact, made his stomach twist. Hunters. What does that mean? Before she could answer, the knocking stopped. Silence. John held his breath, waiting. Then, skirich, a long, slow, deliberate scratching noise against the wooden door. John felt a chill crawl up his spine. He'd seen horror movies before. He knew this was the moment where the dumb character checked the peephole and immediately got grabbed, but his curiosity won over his fear. He took a deep breath and leaned toward the peephole. At first, he saw nothing, just darkness. The dim hallway light flickered weakly, barely illuminating the area. Then, a shape moved. Too fast. John jerked back, his pulse pounding. What the hell was that? He turned to the girl, voice low. "You need to start talking. Now." She hesitated. Then, very softly, she said, "If you let me stay, they will come back." John's stomach twisted. "That's not an answer," he muttered. She finally turned to look at him directly. "You let me in. That means you are involved now." That wasn't what he wanted to hear. At all. John ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. He didn't know this girl. She wasn't normal. Her blue skin, her strange way of speaking, the fact that she barely reacted to anything. Now she was talking about hunters. This was not his problem. He should tell her to leave. Lock the door. Pretend none of this ever happened. But then he looked at her again. Her clothes were still soaked, clinging to her thin frame. There were bruises along her arms, dark and uneven, like someone had grabbed her and wouldn't let go. And her eyes, those large, unblinking eyes, held something beneath the strangeness. Something human. Fear. John exhaled sharply. "Damn it." "Okay," he said finally. "You can stay. For now." She blinked, tilting her head slightly, as if she hadn't expected that response. He gestured toward the couch. "Sit down, and start explaining." She hesitated for only a moment before moving to the couch. She sat with perfect posture, feet together, hands resting on her knees. Too still, too controlled. John grabbed a bottle of water from the kitchen and handed it to her. "Here, drink." She stared at the bottle, turning it in her hands like she didn't understand what to do with it. "Just open it," John said, twisting the cap off for her. She watched him carefully, then mimicked his motion. The cap came off with a soft pop, and she raised the bottle to her lips. But instead of drinking, she let the water touch her tongue for a second before swallowing so slowly it was unnatural. John frowned. "You've never had water before." She set the bottle down, her fingers twitching slightly. "Not like this." A bad feeling settled in John's stomach. "All right," he said, sitting across from her. "Let's start with the basics. What's your name?" She hesitated. Then, very quietly, she said, "Vesha." "Okay, Vesha. Where are you from?" She didn't answer immediately. She seemed to be thinking, as if deciding how much to say. Finally, she looked at him and said, "Not here." John sighed. "Great. Not here as in, not this city, not this country." She blinked slowly. "Not this planet." A beat of silence. John let out a short, nervous laugh. "Okay. Sure. You're an alien pizza delivery girl. Right." Vesha tilted her head again, watching his reaction carefully. "Yes." John's stomach twisted. The way she said it, so direct, no hesitation, it wasn't a joke. His heart thumped. "Prove it," he said before he could stop himself. Vesha looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers. Then, very slowly, she held one hand up, and the air around her palm shimmered. John's breath caught in his throat. The space around her fingers seemed to ripple, bending like heat waves on asphalt. For a brief second, he could see through her hand. Then it was normal again. John swallowed hard. Holy. Before he could finish, the apartment lights flickered again, and then the power went out. Darkness swallowed the room. A cold shiver ran down John's spine. From outside, something tapped against the window. They weren't alone. "The chase begins." A sharp tap against the window made John's blood run cold. The apartment was dark, too dark. The power had cut off completely, leaving only the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the rain-streaked glass. Shadows twisted in the dim light, playing tricks on his eyes. John's heart pounded. He swallowed hard and turned to Vesha, who sat completely still on the couch, her large dark eyes locked onto the window. She didn't blink. She didn't even breathe. Something wasn't right. "Who's out there?" John whispered. Vesha didn't answer. Instead, she slowly, mechanically, reached out and gripped his wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. "They found me," she said softly. John's stomach twisted. He turned back toward the window. At first, he saw nothing. Just rain streaking down the glass. But then, a shape moved. It was fast. Too fast. 1 second, there was nothing. The next, a tall, shadowy figure was standing directly outside, pressed against the window. John barely had time to react before. Bang! A hand slammed against the glass. John stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get out of this apartment, and never look back. The shape outside wasn't human. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with long, spindly limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Its fingers were unnaturally long, tipped with what looked like claws. The way it moved was wrong, like it was phasing in and out of reality. It was watching them. John's hands trembled as he reached for something. Anything, to defend himself. His eyes darted to the kitchen, where a knife sat on the counter. Would that even help? Before he could make a move, Vesha stood up. John turned to her. "We need tow." She held up a hand. "Stay still." Her voice was calm, too calm, like she had been through this before. John swallowed hard, forcing himself not to move. The creature outside tilted its head, like it was listening. Then, As if something had signaled it, it slowly backed away from the window and disappeared into the night. The tension in the room remained thick. John didn't dare breathe. "Did it leave?" he whispered. Vesha didn't answer. She was still standing completely still, staring at the window. Her hands were clenched into tight fists. Then, crash! The front door suddenly exploded inward. Splinters of wood flew in every direction as a second creature burst through. John barely had time to react before Vesha grabbed his arm and yanked him backward. "Run!" she shouted. John didn't need to be told twice. Into the storm. They sprinted toward the back door of the apartment, but John barely made it 3 steps before the entire building shook. Boom! The walls trembled as something massive landed on the roof. John risked a glance over his shoulder. Big mistake. The creature that had broken through the door was now crawling on the ceiling, its long limbs twisting unnaturally. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. John's stomach lurched. "What the hell is that?" Vesha didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed the collar of his shirt and dragged him toward the window. "Jump," she commanded. John's eyes widened. "What? We're on the 3rd floor." Vesha didn't hesitate. She placed one foot on the windowsill and jumped. For a split second, John thought she was insane. But instead of falling, she landed gracefully on the fire escape below. She barely made a sound. John turned back. The creature dropped from the ceiling. It lunged. John had no choice. He threw himself out of the window. On the run, John hit the fire escape hard, his ribs slamming into the metal bars. Pain exploded through his side. But he didn't have time to recover. Vesha was already moving, climbing down the ladder like she had done this 1,000 times before. John scrambled after her. Behind them, the creature let out a horrible, guttural screech. John's heart pounded as his feet hit the wet pavement of the alleyway below. "Where do we go?" he gasped. Vesha grabbed his hand and pulled him forward. Away. Rain pounded against the pavement as they ran. The city streets were eerily empty, as if the world itself had vanished, leaving only the storm and the shadows chasing them. John glanced back. Bad decision. The creature had leaped from the building. It landed on all fours, its limbs bending the wrong way. John's stomach flipped. "It's gaining on us." Vesha yanked him into a side alley. They slid into the shadows, breathing hard. John pressed his back against the wall, his mind racing. What the hell was happening? Who were these things? Vesha peeked around the corner. Her breathing remained steady, but her fists clenched tightly. John wiped the rain from his face. "What do they want?" Vesha's gaze darkened. "Me." John exhaled sharply. "Why?" For the first time, hesitation flickered across her face. Then, finally, she said, "Because I am not supposed to be here." John blinked. "Wait, you mean?" Before he could finish, the creature appeared at the alley entrance. Its glowing eyes locked onto them. Vesha grabbed John's wrist. "No more running." John's pulse pounded. "What do you mean, no more running?" Vesha turned toward the creature and whispered, "Time to fight." Running for their lives. The alley was too narrow, too dark. John's breath came in sharp gasps as the freezing rain soaked through his clothes. His heart pounded against his ribs like a war drum. Vesha stood beside him, eerily calm, her dark eyes locked onto the creature blocking their escape. It was taller than before. Its limbs had stretched, its fingers curling like hooked talons. The glow from its eyes was stronger now, flickering like dying embers. John swallowed hard. "Vesha, I really hope you have a plan." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she raised her hand. The air shimmered around her palm. A faint glow spread across her fingers, subtle, but definitely not human. John's breath caught in his throat. He had seen something like this before, back in the apartment. But now it was stronger, more focused. The creature let out a guttural clicking noise, tilting its head. Then In a movement too fast for John to track, it lunged. Vesha reacted instantly. She threw her hand forward, and suddenly, boom! A pulse of invisible force slammed into the creature, sending it flying backward. It hit the opposite wall hard, bricks cracking on impact. John's mouth fell open. Holy! Vesha didn't wait. She grabbed his wrist. Move! John barely had time to react before she dragged him forward, sprinting down the alley. The rain came down harder, turning the pavement slick beneath their feet. John nearly slipped, but Vesha kept pulling him forward, weaving through the maze of alleys like she had memorized the layout. John's mind raced. Who the hell was she? What the hell had she just done? But there was no time to ask. Behind them, the creature wasn't dead. It screeched, a high-pitched, metallic sound that made John's teeth ache. Then it charged after them. John risked a glance over his shoulder. The thing was moving on all fours now. Its arms stretched unnaturally long, hands slamming against the wet pavement, clawed fingers tearing through concrete like it was paper. John's stomach twisted. There was no way they could outrun it. Vesha, he shouted. It's gaining. She suddenly veered left, dragging him into another alley. Then she stopped. John barely avoided slamming into her. What the hell are you? Then he saw it. A dead end. A massive rusted chain-link fence loomed in front of them, topped with razor wire. There was no way out. John turned, his stomach sinking. The creature skidded to a stop at the entrance of the alley. Rain dripped from its elongated limbs, its glowing eyes locked onto them. John could almost feel the moment it decided they were trapped. His pulse hammered in his ears. This is it. Then Vesha exhaled sharply beside him. John turned to her and froze. Her eyes were glowing. Not brightly, not like the creature's, but a faint, almost unnoticeable silver light flickered in her dark irises. She took a step forward, lifting one hand again. The creature hesitated. Vesha's voice was calm. You have one chance to leave. The creature let out a low, growling hiss. Then it lunged. Fight or die. Vesha's entire body shifted. The air around her bent, not just in her hand, but around her entire frame. The moment the creature got close, she moved. Fast. John barely saw it. 1 second, Vesha was standing in front of him. The next, she was behind the creature. A pulse of energy rippled outward. Cracky. The creature jerked violently, its body convulsing. The moment Vesha touched it, it collapsed onto the ground, twitching. John stared. His brain refused to process what had just happened. Vesha turned to face him, breathing heavily. She swayed slightly, pressing a hand against the alley wall. The glow in her eyes flickered and faded. Vesha, what the hell was that? John demanded. She exhaled, shaking her head. Not now. We need to keep moving. She was right. The creature wasn't dead. It twitched, its long fingers digging into the pavement as it struggled to push itself back up. John's stomach turned. It's still alive. Vesha nodded, gripping his arm again. They don't die easily. John had so many questions, but there was no time. He forced himself to move. Where are we going? Vesha didn't hesitate. Somewhere safe. John almost laughed. Yeah. And where's that? Vesha turned to look at him, really look at him. Then she said, I know a place, but you're not going to like it. The last refuge. Vesha led John through the city streets, moving faster than humanly possible. They ran for what felt like forever, dodging through alleyways, avoiding every streetlight, every open space. John didn't know who or what else might be watching, but he knew one thing. He was way in over his head. Finally, Vesha slowed. They had reached a hidden side door behind an abandoned gas station. The place looked like it hadn't been used in years. She pulled something from her soaked uniform pocket, a small round device. She pressed it against the metal door. The door clicked. Then it opened by itself. John hesitated. You sure about this? Vesha's expression was unreadable. Do you want to survive? John exhaled. Good point. Without another word, he stepped inside. The door shut behind them. And the moment it did, John felt it. The air changed. This wasn't just some hidden shelter. Something deeply unnatural was in here. And John had just walked straight into it. The last refuge. The metal door sealed shut behind them with a quiet hiss, locking out the cold night and the horrors chasing them. John's breathing was heavy, his body still trembling from the adrenaline. The air inside the shelter was thick, too thick. It felt like stepping into another world, a place where reality itself had been stretched thin. Dim bluish lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows along the steel walls. The place was not abandoned. It was operational. John turned to Vesha, his pulse still hammering in his ears. Okay, he said, barely keeping his voice steady. Where the hell are we? Vesha didn't answer right away. She was scanning the room, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. Safe. John scoffed. Yeah, I'll believe that when my hands stop shaking. She turned to him, her gaze sharper than before. You should not have helped me. John blinked. What? You should have shut the door, she said, her voice quiet but firm. You should have let me go. John narrowed his eyes. You're kidding, right? Those things, those hunters, they would have killed you. Vesha didn't react. It was not your fight. John ran a hand through his rain-soaked hair, his frustration building. Well, it sure as hell is now. You dragged me into this, and I still don't even know what the hell is going on. Vesha tilted her head slightly, as if analyzing his words. Then she turned away, stepping further into the dimly lit corridor. Follow me, she said. John hesitated. Every nerve in his body was screaming at him to run the other way. But where would he go? Back into the streets, where monsters with glowing eyes were waiting for him. With a deep breath, he forced himself to follow. Secrets in the shadows. The corridor led them deeper into the underground facility. The metal walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that John didn't recognize. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something metallic. Are you going to tell me where we are? John asked, his voice quieter now. Vesha didn't turn around. This place was once a human military facility, she said. Now it is abandoned. John frowned. So why is it still powered? She didn't answer. John's stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Then they reached a heavy reinforced door at the end of the hallway. Vesha placed her palm against a panel on the wall, and with a quiet beep, the door slid open. Inside was a large, circular room. John's eyes widened. There were machines lining the walls, massive, humming with energy, pulsing with alien blue light. In the center of the room, a floating device spun slowly in midair, covered in glowing symbols that shifted as he stared at them. It was not human technology. John took a step back. What the hell is this? Vesha finally turned to face him. This, she said, is what they were chasing. John's mind reeled. Wait, you mean the hunters? They're after you because of this. Vesha nodded. This technology does not belong here. I was sent to retrieve it, but I refused. John's eyes widened. You refused? Why? She hesitated. Then, for the first time, John saw something new in her expression. Doubt. She turned away, her fingers trailing along the surface of one of the machines. Because I learned the truth. John exhaled sharply. Okay, you keep saying things like that, but you're not actually explaining anything. Vesha finally looked at him, her eyes softer now. John, humans think they are alone in the universe. That is a lie. John's throat went dry. Vesha continued. My people have been watching your world for centuries. We study, we learn, and when the time is right, we take. John's chest tightened. Take what? Vesha's voice was barely a whisper now. Your planet. Your resources, your species. John felt like the ground had just disappeared beneath him. You're saying, your people are planning to invade Earth. Vesha nodded. It has already begun. Silent. Hidden. Your governments do not know. By the time they realize, it will be too late. John's mind raced. He had so many questions. But you're? What? A spy? He asked. Scout, Vesha corrected. I was sent to Earth disguised as a civilian. To study human behavior. To ensure the invasion would be flawless. John stared at her. His pulse was pounding. His hands curled into fists. So, why are you running? He asked. Vesha hesitated. Then she whispered, because I saw what happens next. John swallowed. And? Her gaze darkened. Earth loses. A heavy silence filled the room. John's heart pounded. He had spent his entire life believing humanity was in control. That if aliens ever showed up, it would be in some far future war, with armies and spaceships and explosions. Not this. Not a slow, secret, quiet takeover. He looked around the room, at the alien technology humming softly, hidden beneath the very city he lived in. This isn't just about you running, he realized, his voice shaking. You're trying to stop it. Vesha gave a small nod. John ran a shaky hand down his face. Oh hell. Then, a loud clang echoed through the facility. John froze. Vesha tensed, her head snapping toward the entrance. They weren't alone. From somewhere deep in the facility, a distant, metallic screech rang out. John's stomach dropped. Tell me that was just the pipes, he muttered. Vesha's expression turned deadly serious. No, she said. They found us. The truth revealed. The metallic screech echoed through the underground facility, vibrating through the steel walls like a warning from something ancient and hungry. John's breath hitched. His fingers curled into fists as his pulse hammered against his skull. They found us. That's what Vesha had said. And now John could hear them. A distant, rhythmic clanking, like metal feet against the cold floors. Slow, deliberate, hunting. He turned to Vesha, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me we have a way out. Vesha was already moving, her posture tight with urgency. There is one. John exhaled. Great. Let's use it. Vesha shot him a sharp look. It will not be easy. John let out a dry, humorless laugh, because everything else tonight has been a breeze. She didn't respond. Instead, she reached into a hidden pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small, circular device. It was about the size of a golf ball, covered in strange, shifting symbols that pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. John's stomach twisted. Okay, what is that? Vesha didn't answer. Instead, she pressed her thumb against the surface. The symbols flashed, and suddenly, the walls around them rippled. John took a step back, his heart lurching. What the hell? Vesha turned to him, her voice urgent. This facility is more than a hiding place. It was a relay station, an outpost my people built years ago. John swallowed hard. A relay station for what? Her dark eyes locked onto his. For monitoring Earth's defenses. John's stomach dropped. Vesha continued. My people have studied your kind for centuries. They know your technology, your weaknesses, your strengths. And they know. She hesitated. John's chest tightened. They know what? She looked away. They know that humanity cannot win. Silence. John felt his throat tighten. They're wrong, he said, his voice rough. Vesha didn't answer. Another metallic screech cut through the quiet. Closer this time. John gritted his teeth. He wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but now wasn't the time. Vesha turned back to the device in her hands. The symbol shifted again, glowing brighter. John's eyes darted between her and the dark corridors around them. What are you doing? Vesha exhaled. Activating the failsafe. John frowned. Failsafe. She finally looked at him. This facility was built to remain hidden, but in the event of a breach, it has a final function. John's stomach twisted. He already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. Vesha confirmed it. It will collapse in on itself, she said, destroying everything inside. John's mouth went dry. Including us? He asked. Vesha nodded. John let out a sharp laugh. Okay, so let me get this straight. Your big plan is to bury us alive. Vesha didn't blink. The hunters cannot get this data. If they do, the invasion will accelerate. The resistance will have no chance. John froze. The resistance, he echoed. Vesha hesitated again. Then, very quietly, she said, there are others like me. John's mind reeled. Wait, you're telling me there are more of you? More aliens trying to stop this invasion? Vesha nodded, but they are few. And they are running out of time. John exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This was too much, too big. But before he could say anything, bang! The metal door at the end of the corridor dented inward. John's pulse spiked. Another bang. The door buckled. Then, slowly, it started to melt. John stumbled backward. Vesha grabbed his wrist. It's time. John dug his heels in. Wait, he said. There has to be another way. You can't just. She turned to him, her expression hard. Would you rather they find this place? John clenched his jaw. Would you rather we die? Vesha hesitated. Then, for the first time since he had met her, something shifted in her expression. She wasn't just a soldier. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was scared. John swallowed. There's another way. There has to be. Vesha's grip on his wrist tightened. Then, the door collapsed. A wave of searing heat filled the corridor. John barely had time to react before they came through. Face to face with the enemy. The first hunter stepped forward. John finally got a clear look at it. Its body was long and twisted, its limbs too thin, its skin dark and metallic, reflecting the dim light like liquid steel. Its eyes glowed, shifting colors in a way that made John's stomach churn. But it was its face that sent a shiver down his spine. It had no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin where a mouth should be. The second hunter followed, then the third. John took a step back. Oh, Vesha. Vesha didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her gaze locked on the creatures. Then, one of them spoke. Not with words, with his mind. John felt the voice like a knife being dragged through his skull. You have run long enough. John gasped. He clutched his head as white-hot pain seared through his thoughts. He could feel the hunter inside his mind. It was cold, hollow, like staring into an empty abyss. John's knees buckled. He hit the floor, gasping. Vesha stepped in front of him. Her voice was cold. I am not going back. The lead hunter tilted its head. You do not have a choice. Then, the walls trembled. John forced his eyes open. He saw Vesha's hands glowing, brighter than before. She turned to him, her voice low. There is no running now. John's heart slammed against his ribs. Vesha, what are you? She grabbed his arm. And then, the entire world exploded. The final stand. A shockwave of energy erupted from Vesha's hands, distorting the air like ripples on the surface of a lake. The underground facility shook violently, the walls trembling as if reality itself was bending. John barely had time to react before the force lifted him off his feet. Boom! He hit the ground hard, his ears ringing. His vision blurred as the world around him cracked and shattered like glass, or maybe that was just his mind struggling to keep up. The hunters didn't flinch. The lead one stepped forward, completely unfazed. Its glowing eyes flickered as it scanned the air, sensing Vesha's power like a predator locking onto prey. You are alone. The words were not spoken, yet John felt them deep in his skull. Vesha didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand again, and the ground beneath them fractured. Bang! A massive shockwave slammed into the hunters. The force ripped through the air, sending machinery flying, tearing panels from the walls. The hunters staggered, but did not fall. John scrambled backward, his hands digging into the cold steel floor. His heart slammed against his ribs. This was wrong. Vesha was powerful. He had seen it. But these things, they weren't just chasing her. They had come here knowing exactly what she was capable of. They had prepared. John's gut twisted. They weren't here to capture her. They were here to end her. A fight John can't win. The second hunter raised a long, clawed hand. FWOOM. A streak of black energy lashed out like a whip, striking the floor inches from John's leg. He barely rolled away in time. The metal melted on contact. His breath hitched. Vishe. She didn't turn. Her focus was entirely on the lead hunter. Her expression was unreadable. You can't beat them, John gasped, pushing himself up. We have to. Vesha suddenly spoke, her voice calm but firm. I am not alone. John frowned. What? Then, something moved in the darkness behind them. John turned sharply and froze. The resistance arrives. A figure emerged from the shadows. Then another. And another. John's breath caught in his throat. They weren't human. They looked like Vesha, but different. Some had markings along their arms, glowing faintly in the dim light. Others had mechanical implants, their bodies enhanced with alien technology. Their eyes shimmered with the same eerie glow as Vesha's, but their expressions were sharp, focused, dangerous. John's stomach flipped. He had spent the last few hours believing Vesha was alone, that she was some kind of rogue agent, a fugitive from her own people. But now he realized. She wasn't running. She was leading. One of the newcomers, a tall, battle-scarred figure, stepped forward. His voice was deep, steady. Vesha, we are here. The lead hunter tilted its head. So be it. Then, chaos. War breaks loose. The first attack came fast. One of Vesha's people lunged, moving at inhuman speed. Their hands crackled with energy, and they clashed with the nearest hunter. Boom! The force of impact sent shockwaves through the room. Sparks flew. Machinery exploded. John ducked, barely avoiding a piece of shattered debris. Everything erupted into battle. Flashes of energy. Screams of pain. Blades made of pure light clashing in the darkness. John had never seen anything like it. This wasn't a fight. This was a war. And he was right in the middle of it. John's choice. He turned to Vesha, his mind racing. This is your plan. You knew they were coming. Vesha dodged an incoming attack, flipping midair, landing effortlessly beside him. I hoped they would find us in time. John stared at her. You. He exhaled sharply. You used me as bait. Vesha's eyes softened. You were not bait. John gritted his teeth. Then what the hell am I? Vesha hesitated. Then she said, you are proof. John blinked. What? She gestured toward the chaos, the hunters struggling against the resistance fighters. You were never supposed to know about this war. None of your kind was. But now you do. John's chest tightened. Why does that matter? He asked, almost afraid of the answer. Vesha stepped closer. Because now, she said softly, you have a choice. John felt his breath catch. Vesha lifted her hand. The small device from before was still in her palm, glowing faintly. It will not be long before more of them come, she said. This war is only beginning. And soon, humanity will have to decide. John swallowed. Decide what? Vesha's gaze locked onto his. Whether to fight back. John's entire body went cold. This was real. All of it. The invasion. The war. The possibility that everything he knew, everything humanity had built, could be wiped out before they even understood what was happening. But now he knew the truth. And maybe, just maybe, he could do something about it. The final choice. A loud explosion shook the facility. John turned to see the lead hunter collapsing, its body flickering like a broken hologram. The Resistance had won this fight. But the war? The war was just beginning. Vesha turned back to him. "We must leave." John exhaled, his hands clenched into fists. "Where?" Vesha's gaze didn't waver. "To prepare." John looked back one last time. The underground facility, once a place of secrecy, now a battlefield, was beginning to collapse. He took a deep breath. Then, finally, he grabbed Vesha's hand. "Let's go."